The church fellowship hall in Shreveport, Louisiana, hummed with the quiet chaos of a packed house on an unusual Tuesday night. Folding chairs scraped against the polished hardwood floor, and the faint scent of coffee and potluck casseroles lingered from the Sunday service just days before. Tonight, though, the room buzzed with a different energy, anticipation. At the front stood Joe Biden, his familiar white hair catching the glow of the fluorescent lights. His hands steady, but his demeanor softer than usual. The crowd, a mix of working families, retirees, and curious locals, settled in, their murmurs filling the air like a low hum. Among them sat 9-year-old Emma, her small frame perched on the edge of a metal chair. She wore her favorite denim dress, the one her mom said made her look like a little patriot, and clutched an old leather-bound Bible to her chest. Its cover was scuffed, the gold lettering faded from years of use. It had been her grandpa's, a keepsake she'd clung to since he passed last spring. Beside her, her mom, a tired but proud single mother, leaned over and whispered, "You can ask him, but only if you're brave enough." Emma nodded, her stomach twisting like a pretzel. She'd been practicing her question for weeks, scribbling it on the back of her math homework and whispering it under her breath while swinging at recess. Biden took the mic, his voice gravelly but warm, talking about jobs, health care, and the future of small towns like theirs. The audience clapped politely, some nodding along, but the energy felt more like a PTA meeting than a big city rally. Emma barely heard the words. Her hands tightened around the Bible, her bitten-down nails digging into the leather. When the floor finally opened for questions, a line formed, folks asking about taxes, road repairs, and one guy even complimenting Biden's aviator sunglasses. Emma froze, her sneakers glued to the floor. Her mom gave her a gentle nudge. "Go on, honey. Honey, you've got this." Her legs wobbled as she stood, all 4 feet of her trembling like a leaf in a Louisiana storm. The crowd's chatter faded as she shuffled forward, the Bible dwarfing her tiny hands. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Who's that little girl? What's she doing?" Until she reached the front. Biden looked down, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Well, hey there, sweetheart," he said, his tone soft as a grandpa handing out Werther's originals. "What's your question?" Emma swallowed hard, her heart pounding so loud she swore the whole room could hear it. Then, in a voice small but steady, she asked, "Mr. Biden, what does God mean to you?" The hall went dead silent. No coughs, no creaks, just a stillness so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. Biden blinked, his usual easy grin faltering. Emma's question hung there, simple but heavy, like a pebble dropped in a still pond. For a guy known for quick quips and folksy charm, Biden didn't answer right away. He glanced at the Bible in her hands, then back at her wide, searching eyes. The crowd leaned in, chairs forgotten, coffee cups abandoned. He rested a hand on the podium, steadying himself. "That's a big one," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. "And I'll be honest, it's not one I've always had figured out." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces, then back at Emma. "When I was your age, maybe a little older, I used to sit in church with my folks back in Scranton. We'd go every Sunday, rain or shine. I'd stare at those stained glass windows, all reds and blues, wondering if God was up there listening. My dad had tell me faith was like a ladder. You climb it one rung at a time. Even when your hands shake, even when you're scared you'll slip. I didn't get back then. Thought it was just something grown-ups said to sound wise." A few folks chuckled, the sound breaking the tension like a crack in a dam. But Emma didn't laugh. Her eyes stayed locked on him, waiting. Biden leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "Life's thrown a lot at me since then. Hard days, losses that hit like a ton of bricks. There were times I wasn't sure God was around. Times I got mad at him, times I wondered if he'd checked out on me. But you know what I learned?" He glanced at Emma, his face softening. "Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting there's a reason, even when you can't see it. God, to me, is that reason, the push to keep climbing, even when the ladder's rickety." Emma's eyes shimmered, a single tear slipping down her cheek. The crowd noticed. their whispers growing, but no one dared break the spell. Her mom reached for her, murmuring, Okay, baby? Okay, baby." Emma shook her head, not in sadness, but in something bigger, something she couldn't name. Biden's words had cracked open a piece of her heart she'd kept locked since her grandpa died. She hugged the Bible tighter, tears spilling now, quiet but unstoppable. Biden stepped away from the podium, his own eyes glistening under the lights. "You're a brave one, asking that," he said, his voice thick. "Braver than me some days." The room erupted in soft gasps and sniffles, folks dabbing their eyes with sleeves or napkins from the dessert table. Emma's question, pure, raw, and real, had turned a sleepy town hall into something sacred, a moment no one in Shreveport would soon forget. The Fellowship Hall of First Baptist Church in Shreveport, Louisiana, buzzed with the soft hum of a Thursday night crowd. Metal folding chairs creaked against the hardwood floor, and the faint smell of potluck mac and cheese hung in the air from last Sunday's supper. Tonight, though, the room held a different vibe, electric yet grounded. Up front stood Joe Biden, his white hair glowing under the fluorescent lights, his aviators tucked into his jacket pocket. The crowd, factory workers, retirees, kids fidgeting in their seats, watched him with a mix of curiosity and familiarity. In the third row sat 9-year-old Emma, her denim dress wrinkled from nervous fidgeting. She clutched her grandpa's old leather Bible, its edges worn smooth from decades of use. Her mom, a nurse still in her faded scrubs, gave her a reassuring nod. "You can ask him, Em," she'd whispered earlier over a hurried dinner of PB&J sandwiches, "but only if you mean it." Emma's heart thumped like a bass drum. She'd rehearsed her question for weeks, scribbling it on napkins and muttering it while feeding the chickens out back. Biden's voice rolled out, warm and gravelly, touching on jobs, healthcare, and the grit of small-town America. Folks clapped here and there, but the energy stayed low-key, more like a backyard barbecue than a hyped-up rally. Emma barely listened, her sweaty palms pressing into the Bible. When the Q&A opened, a line formed, people asking about gas prices or potholes on Main Street. Emma hesitated, her sneakers glued to the floor, until her mom's elbow nudged her. "Go on, kiddo." She stood, all 4 feet 2 inches of her trembling, and shuffled to the mic. The room quieted as eyes turned to the tiny girl dwarfed by her grandpa's Bible. Biden leaned down, his grin softening. "Hey there, sweetheart. What's your name?" "Emma," she stammered, barely audible. "That's a beautiful name," he said, his Delaware drawl gentle. "What's on your mind?" She took a shaky breath and asked, "Mr. Biden, what does God mean to you?" The hall went still, a hush so deep you could hear the crickets outside. Biden blinked, caught off guard. For a guy known for quick stories and easy charm, he paused, his hand resting on the podium. The crowd leaned in, coffee cups forgotten. "Oh, we are." He looked at Emma, then her Bible, and said, "That's a big question, Emma. Sometimes the simplest ones are the toughest." She nodded, tears welling up as she whispered, "My grandpa used to say God's always listening, even when it's quiet." Biden's eyes flickered with something. Recognition, maybe, and he took a deep breath. "You know," he said, turning to the crowd, "this little girl just asked what most of us dodge every day. What does God mean to us? It's not easy. It makes you dig deep, face your doubts, your messes." The room stayed silent, Emma's question, hanging like a lantern in the dark. She wasn't just a kid anymore. She was a spark lighting up something bigger. Biden's voice softened. "Text away. I read like that. Clearly on the bar." Biden's voice softened. "We're always chasing answers out there. Jobs, money, you name it. But the real stuff, that's inside. What do you believe when the lights are off?" "Thanks, Emma, for reminding me." The crowd broke into soft applause, but Emma didn't notice. She wiped her cheeks with her sleeve, pride replacing tears. Her mom beamed, eyes glassy. Biden wasn't done, though. He shifted, his gaze settling back on her. "When I was young," he began, "I thought I had life figured out. Growing up in Scranton, I had big dreams, a loud mouth, and not much else. But there was this one moment that flipped everything." He paused, the room so quiet you could hear a pin drop. "My sister-in-law, Nelia," he said, his voice catching. She was sunshine, smart, kind, the glue in our family. When she and my little girl died in that crash, I was mad at God, mad at the world. Why them? Why not me? Emma stared, her face too wise for her years. Around her, folks dabbed their eyes with napkins from the dessert table. "For a long time, I shut God out," Biden went on, "but one night, I swear I saw Nelia in a dream, smiling that big smile of hers, saying, 'Keep going, Joe. Joe!' And I got it. Faith isn't about answers. It's about trust, even when you're lost." Emma stood taller, hugging her Bible like a lifeline. Biden smiled at her. "So, Emma, God to me, he's the push to keep climbing, the hope when it's dark." Before the room could settle, a hand shot up. A rugged guy in a flannel shirt, maybe a mechanic, maybe a dad, stood. "Mr. Biden," he said, voice steady, "I've wrestled with faith for years. Hearing you talk about doubt and hope, it hits home. Are we all just scared to admit we're struggling?" Biden nodded, leaning on the podium. "You bet. We act tough, but faith's messy. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing up, even when you're yelling into the wind." The man sat, a flicker of relief on his face. Then Emma piped up, clear as a bell. "Grandpa said faith's like planting seeds. You don't see them grow right away, but you believe they will." Biden chuckled, warm and real. "Your grandpa was a smart man. Faith's a seed. Slow, steady, growing when you least expect." The room buzzed alive. Nods, whispers, shared looks. It wasn't a town hall anymore. It was a campfire confessional. An older woman, silver hair in a bun, raised her hand. "I lost my husband last year," she said, voice quaking. "I'm so angry at God. Have I lost my faith for good?" Biden stepped closer, his tone soft but firm. "Never too late. Faith waits. It sneaks back in the quiet when you're ready." She nodded, tears falling, and the crowd sat in hush. Some sniffling, others lost in thought. What started as a routine night in Shreveport had turned into something raw, a shared stitch of doubt, hope, and grace, all sparked by a girl and her question. Biden looked at Emma one last time. "You're wise beyond your years, kid. Keep asking the big ones." The air in the First Baptist Fellowship Hall in Shreveport, Louisiana, crackled with something new that Thursday night. What started as a hum of small talk over folding chairs and lukewarm coffee had shifted. No longer just another town hall. Joe Biden stood at the podium, his white hair catching the fluorescent glow, his voice steady but softer than usual. The crowd, factory folks, retirees, and kids tugging at their parents' sleeves, had come for politics but stumbled into something deeper, sparked by a 9-year-old girl named Emma and her simple, brave question. Emma, in her denim dress, sat clutching her grandpa's worn leather Bible, her cheeks still pink from earlier tears. Her question, "Mr. Biden, what does God mean to you?" had cracked the evening wide open. Now, the room buzzed, not with noise, but with a quiet, electric vulnerability. People who'd walked in expecting tax talk were leaning forward, sharing glances, caught up in a moment that felt like a backyard bonfire confession. Biden straightened, his eyes sweeping the hall. "You know," he said, his Delaware drawl wrapping around the words, "I've learned something over the years. Faith doesn't always show up in big, flashy moments. It's in the small stuff. When a neighbor drops off a casserole after a rough day, or a kid like Emma asks a question that stops you cold." The crowd hung on every word, his usual folksy charm humbled by something real. He nodded at Emma. "This little girl reminded me tonight. Faith isn't just talk, it's how we live, and when we live it, it spreads." Emma cracked a shy smile, her mom pulling her close with a whispered word that made her grin widen. Biden's tone firmed up. "We're in a time when everything, politics, opinions, you name it, tries to yank us apart. But faith, that's the glue. It's not about agreeing on every little thing. It's knowing we're all climbing the same shaky ladder, step by step. No matter where we started." A slow clap started in the back. Swelling as folks stood, not just for Biden, but for Emma's courage and the raw truth they'd all stumbled into. As the applause faded, Biden leaned in. So here's my challenge tonight. Ask yourself what faith means to you. Don't dodge it, even if it's messy or unclear. Faith isn't about having it all figured out. It's about believing anyway. He paused, letting it sink in, then added, and if something hit you tonight, hold on to it. Let it grow. Share it with someone who needs it. The room erupted again, but this time it was more than clapping. Hugs broke out, hands were shaken, a few tears slipped down weathered cheeks. Strangers who'd shuffled in with polite nods now lingered, swapping stories over the dessert table. The hall felt lighter, like a weight had lifted off Shreveport's shoulders. Emma, standing with her mom, watched as Biden stepped off the podium and ambled over. He crouched down eye to eye with her, his aviators still tucked in his pocket. "Thank you, Emma," he said, voice low and sincere. "You've got more guts than half the grown-ups I know." "Don't ever lose that," she nodded, sticking out her small hand. "Thank you, Mr. Biden," she said, steady now for answering. He shook it, grinning that classic Biden grin, then stood and waved to the crowd before heading out. The chatter didn't die down. Folks stayed, their faces softer, changed. Emma tugged her mom's sleeve. Grandpa would have been proud, right? Her mom's eyes glistened. Proud? Sweetheart? He had been blown away. As the hall emptied, the message lingered like the last note of a hymn. Sometimes the smallest questions unlock the biggest answers, piecing together parts of us we didn't know were lost. If this hit you, take a sec. What's faith to you? Share it with someone today. And hey, don't forget to hit subscribe for more stories that pull us closer, challenge us, and light the way.